Yeah. All right, so we will go ahead and jump right in. We're continuing on with chapter 4. Did anyone have a chance? You can just give a little emoji or thumbs up if you had a chance to look at the chapter. This is chapter 4. All right, Stacy's giving me a thumbs up. Any other thumbs up? And Ami has, Ida has. Good. All right. So now we're, in this chapter, what's happening is that we are introducing kind of the 4 main teachings that Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita, and they're summarized in this situation. But this is the rest of the book then kind of falls under going deeper into what these 4 things mean. So yeah, Krishna's counsel on the battlefield. And so I just wanted to, as usual, we just go over our culture that we're bringing to this group. So we want everyone to bring their full presence to their group and undivided attention. That the second is that we're respecting everyone that's come from different backgrounds and cultures. And the third is the determination to do the work that's being asked of us. So, and I really feel when we look at this chapter specifically, it might seem a little bit, in one sense, gloomy because they're putting forth a lot of, what I like to call the powerful enemies that we have to battle in our life. But this is where the determination really comes in. And then, as always, I just wanted to go over our two things we should remember and the 2 things we should try to forget. And these are, consider these practices in developing our humility. And the reason why there's this quality of humility stressed so much is because this quality of amanitvam that the Bhagavad Gita talks about, it's the essential quality that's needed for us to understand the deeper teachings that are presented in this text. So the 2 things we should always remember in our life are what good others have done for us and what bad we have done to them. And so this is really important because what good others have done for us will always help us remind that we need each other. And then the second is this, when we've necessarily offended or done something bad to someone else, it keeps us in the space of always wanting to improve. The things we should always try to forget are what bad others have done to us and what good we have done for others, right? And so these are things that we should always try as best possible in our life to let go of and move forward. And although I will admit it's always easier said than done, but again, this is why humility is not always the easiest quality to develop. And so I will start with our invocation of auspicious energy, and we give thanks to our teachers. So I'll go ahead. Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukam karoti vachalam pangulangete girim yat kripatam aham vande Shri Guru Dinataranam. Vanchakalpatrubhyascha kripa sunde vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So as always, we are born into a space of having ignorance or no knowledge, and our spiritual teachers and mentors have come to open our eyes with the torch of knowledge. We offer our respects to them. And the second is I offer our sincere respects to our spiritual teachers who, as I say, can make what is impossible possible. And then the third is offering our sincere respects to everyone who is gathered, who are all seekers of the divine and can fulfill the desires of everyone and are full of compassion for all living beings. So thank you again for joining us. Did anyone have any thoughts or reflection that they wanted to start off from last week? I know that there was some great discussion on the forum in our WhatsApp group. I wanted to thank both Avantika and I think it was Gabrielle. They left some really nice comments and summaries of last week. But if there's anyone that wants to share anything from last week, please go ahead. Arun, it's also good to see you today. Arun, if you want to just take a moment, maybe because we have new members in the group, if you want to just tell us where you're from and what you're up to.
Yeah, I'm I am Arun Bansal. I am from Delhi, India. I'm a businessman.
Perfect. It's great to have you. We haven't seen you in a little while. And
Thank
then
you.
the other person.
Thanks a lot, Ricky.
And then we have Livia, who's also joining us. She's outside of Toronto, and I know she's new to others. Thanks for joining us, Livia.
I just can't speak very loudly. Sorry.
It's okay. All right. Any if there's no thoughts or comments from last week, any questions that came up? All right, we will dive right into it. So this fourth chapter really, again, describes or helps us appreciate the journey that we're on. And so this battlefield of Kurukshetra is described in this first part of this chapter 4. And if we see, the first 4 lines of this chapter, and this is really the 4 main tenets of the rest of the book: set out on the journey of the soul, let every step be its own reward, let discernment be the warrior's sword, let sacred love be your only goal. And so this is really telling us now what this book is about, this Bhagavad Gita. And as you see here, it describes really what the meaning of Kurukshetra, what the word means. And if you remember, Kuru means to act, and it comes from the word Kri. And Kshetra means the field. So literally this word Kurukshetra means the field of action. And for us, it means the field of action at all times. So really this, the knowledge and wisdom that's given out in this book, it's, Simon, he refers to, it's not meant for someone who's looking to live on their own, necessarily in the wilderness, living monastic life. This is really meant for our day-to-day, busy, complex, intricate lives that we're all experiencing on a day-to-day basis. It is, every single one of us, again, we've said many times that you and I were all kings and queens of our own kingdom, right? And so every day on this, in this kingdom, we're also faced with challenges, and this is actually our battlefield. And if we see here, from what he says that the Bhagavad Gita is a dialogue between Krishna and the warrior prince Arjuna, is a book about fighting the adversaries within and winning. These are the obstacles that prevent us from manifesting our full potential, right? It says these teachings are meant for the most difficult and demanding action, right? And so the most difficult challenges that we come about in our lives, this specifically is what the knowledge is meant for. And if you notice in part 2, he compares this book to The Art of War. Has anyone looked at or read The Art of War by Sun Tzu? It's a very famous book. But this book, The Art of War, it's more about military art and military battle. And so he compares it that although this is on the battlefield, this book is about not overcoming the challenges that are outside of us, but in fact within us. And so what I wanted everyone just to take a few minutes to do as our first kind of opening reflection is just meditating a little bit on the battlefield of Kurukshetra in our own life, right? And we said the Kurukshetra means the field of action, right? And we discussed that this we're all on a different battlefield, but I wanted us just to be able to first identify our challenges or situations in our life that currently make it a heated battlefield. So again, this is going to be very unique to everybody, but we wanted to take an opportunity to first, for us to reflect, how are we in Arjuna's, also in his position? What's happening in our life currently at this very moment that makes it, that we can identify our own Kurukshetra. So I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to just take a moment to reflect on that. I'll also post a question in the chat for everyone else to see as well. All right. So this is a bigger question, but what I wanted everyone to do with whatever list that they had made was to now look at that list and just reflect on what portion of their list was something that's happening, outside of them versus something that they're internally struggling with. And hopefully that becomes fairly apparent in terms of what we're referring to. There's going to be various, situations that we might be involved in. And then there are emotions or feelings that we're dealing with in response to those situations. So I wanted us to try to be able to kind of peel away and separate the two. If it doesn't make sense, you feel free to let me know. Does anyone have any overarching kind of comments or reflections in their observations? Doesn't have to be specifics if you choose not to, but just something you've observed by kind of thinking about the various facets.
I'm really looking forward to this session at the moment, and I think Aphid, my friends, may agree. So what we are experiencing in Melbourne, Victoria, where we're living, is daily protests and riots, because we are experiencing the lack of human right and freedom and democracy. So there's two parts to this. One is what is happening outside of me, my environment. My environment being what the government is taking away and locking in constantly, consistently, every day. and then the impact of and then the battle within. And I think my friend Aped can definitely share a little bit about this as well, because I think we're all experiencing it, aren't we, Aped? So there's the battle. We are actually, I can say we are on that battlefield right now, as
Yeah.
it is. You look right around, you're right in the middle of it. And then internally as well. Aped, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, definitely. I was just looking at my list and the way Ricken was asking us to divide it, and you can see the playing out of the division in the community. Like there's such a division in terms of people who are wanting to get vaxxed, not get vaxxed, and then there's people who are out there protesting and people totally against it. So that division externally is also happening internally. For a lot of people. So I think you can see the collective consciousness stuff going on, and then the internal existential crisis happening
Hello.
for people. Yeah, definitely agree.
But there's
One
but
second.
there's Aaron, can you mute?
Yeah, I
please?
just muted him.
Thank you. But there is definitely, it really is a battlefield this week, isn't it? We are talking about police, and for the first time in my life, I've never experienced hearing guns go off. And they're rubber bullets at the moment, but there is this force of police coming in. So we are definitely in the battlefield. So I'm really looking forward to this session, Ricken. And
Yeah.
getting some insights to how I deal with it. And then also manage my environment around it as well. So,
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing both. I mean, some of those, not maybe to the same extent in maybe other parts of the world, especially where I am. But as you were saying, for this, this kind of whole, notion now for kind of mandatory vaccination, I know has challenged a lot of people's ability to choose, and it comes closer to home when it's people that's impacting you. I have people, I have very close friends that have chosen not to get vaccinated, and that's, not the topic of discussion, but how it's going to impact their life in terms of just even maintaining their livelihood, right? Being able to do what they do, support a family, and these things. So it's it's very much becoming, it's hitting home to a lot more people now that certain policies are being in place, and while we can say that the internal impacts the external with time will also impact our internal world as well, right? So yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. It's that's really important to acknowledge. Anybody else wanted to share anything that they observed?
So Rick and I'd like to share.
Yeah, please.
So,
Avantika, you can go next.
So I feel like, so some of you know that on September 1st, I stepped into entrepreneurship full time, right? From having been in the corporate world for many years. And I feel like I'm kind of still in a kind of a battle with time, right? Because when I had kind of planned to do some certain things, right? And really be focusing on coaching and some other things. And then I just started to write I've been wanting to write a book for years, and I just started to just write it. I was inspired to write it right basically this day after. And so I feel like I am, and I will get inspired and just write the whole day. And so it's kind of like this balance between saying, hey, should I spend my time on the practical, short-term things or the longer term? And so there's some things going on with that I kind of have to work out. At the same time, I think it's teaching me to go with the flow and follow inspiration, right? And let go and say, hey, this is what I'm being called to do right now. So I'm just going to pursue it. Right. But it is a battlefield, I think, between like this thought I had in my head that, okay, I don't have enough time. And that's why I don't have enough time for my business. Right. And so left the corporate world, I'm like, I should have time, but I still don't have time. Right.
Yeah. Stacey, what I hear from you when you were talking is just this challenge sometimes, well, many of us have of, our head and our heart, right? And
yes.
And, the head is always going to be logical. Okay, I got to be practical. I got to focus on the things that's in front of me right now. I can't neglect, let's say, like family responsibilities and so many other things that come in our day-to-day life. And then the heart is really, it's kind of the soul's calling to kind of move forward in a way that you've been called to do. So I can really appreciate that. Well, and for me, one of the things that come up when you were speaking is just this notion of wanting to feel understood. I think that's really something that all of us go through in a different way in our life. I've always, from all the reading and learning I've done, there's a great need for the soul to feel, expressed and understood. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Avantika?
Hi. Yeah, so the question is, what challenge or situations in life, make it a heated battlefield? And I just, when I was reflecting on this, what came to me was that there are many stages in the dark night of the soul for those of us who've been through it, maybe, a decade ago or so. For many people, I've heard that, they've even been through it a long time ago. And some people are probably right now in it. But there comes a stage where, your soul or your higher self or whatever takes over. And there's very limited, affirmative action that you're really taking. You're pretty much just kind of, going with the flow. So the conflict or the dichotomy that I've faced many times in the past decade consistently is that of spiritual paradoxes. And the paradox is, how much to be passive in the flow, which is what the dharma code is, and how much to kind of be over functioning or not functioning at all in the Kurukshetra, the karma bhumi, the karma code. And, for instance, like someone also Stacey spoke about being an entrepreneur. So prior to my dark night of the soul, it was so much easier to be a business functioning person, an entrepreneur, because you kind of had these rules that you had to follow. But being a spiritual person and, now leading a spiritual based organization or a impact based organization, one has to constantly be in that conflict or that inner Kurukshetra of how many of those rules, which, are still one needs to keep following, so that because you can't be your best kept, the world's best kept secret, you can't create that impact. And when to kind of, stop getting in your own way and allow for the universe or, the turn of events to just take you to where you need to be. Same with relationships as well, because when the breakdown of the material world happens, it is actually a symptom of the fact that, you're getting out of your own way and you're kind of, being guided. But sometimes there's resistance and fear that comes up as a result of that, because it's very easy to fall back on, the known ways or the familiar ways or what everyone around you is saying is the right way to do. So I think that to me has been a consistent, Kurukshetra, is how to know when to be active, because it's not just enough to just be passive and allow things to keep going all the time, because there are certain guidances to take steps and when to be not over functioning and just let go and let be. Yeah, that's what I want to share.
Yeah, thank you, Avantika. It reminds me, there's one of my mentors, he's passed away. His name is Bhakti Tirtha Swami, and he always had this notion that we should work like it depends on us, but we should pray like it depends on, that it depends on God. And so it kind of merges what Avantika, I think, is discussing of our effort versus, divine will and providence in our existence. And I will definitely say that it's not always easy to decipher between the two. Because the tendency definitely is to rely on our own strength. I don't know if Avantika, you can maybe relate to that, but I definitely have been in that situation where it's hard to know sometimes when we've over endeavored in life in certain things, and when to know sometimes when to pull back. No, thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? That's a really good one.
Yes.
Please, Bilitis.
Yes. What I wanted to share is, yes, like it's the first time I was feeling this over the weekend, that my mindset was like a rough sea, but my soul was aligned, and it was in terms of personal relationship, and so it was it was an interesting feeling. So I had to step out of my mind and have faith on my soul, and just see and live one day after another. And the second thing is my internal struggle. I realize is like, yes, having this gaining more clarity on where is my potential. Because I have the tendency, I realize, to move to focus on one thing for a week or two and then go to the next one, and I don't leave it enough time to plant the seed and see it grow. So am I scared as well of going deep and see this seed takes off? So I came to the point of simply, yes, like surrendering and see how it goes, if it feels right for me to continue, and to be aware that I want to give myself more time for things to flourish, and yes, and go where my potential is recognized, and where I can support others. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bilitis. I don't know if anyone, I mean, Avantika or anybody has any thoughts on how they personally in their journey, like kind of reconcile the two, or how they go about kind of knowing, their own, like how they know where their personal endeavor is enough, versus also kind of taking signs in their life that, you should continue on, and, the God or the universe is asking you for kind of more, more faith, more surrender, versus sometimes pulling back and waiting, and how people go about kind of reconciling those two pieces. Because I hear kind of the same thing from both Bilitis and Avantika, and to me, that's a natural question that comes about.
Hey, great observation. I obviously, I think all of us develop our own styles of figuring that out. And I think everyone does figure it out at some point in their journey for themselves. It makes sense to them. I love what Robin Sharma says, that when your fear and your deepest desire point in the same direction, that's a great compass and a great map to have, because that helps you understand that that's where your action should be. That's not where you should be sitting in renunciation and saying, no, this is not for me, or this is for another day. Because when there is intense fear, but intense motivation and inspiration to go in a certain direction, is really when one should go into the action mode. And then when there is hubris, when there is like conflict, when there is a lot of disharmony, or coming up against a lot of competition, conflict, egos, and stuff like that, it's a great compass and a great map to take a step back, dial things down, and say, I need to do things differently, because I'm creating this. What I, as within, as so without. That's just something I've learned along the way. And finally, I think there are certain certain things that so I always feel that that we travel a billion light years without sometimes moving a single step. So we have to change our definition of what action really is, because sometimes when you look back at yourself a year ago and you see that maybe you didn't do anything in your enterprise or in your book or in your anything, but there's been a sea change within yourself. You're a more patient person, you're a more tolerant person, you're a more accepting person. That also has been a result of some action within yourself. So we need to change our definition of what action and result is as well. I hope that answers a little bit. That works for me.
Avantika, it's such a great point that you mentioned about changing the goalpost of what we consider success and results, that internal change, which is really what, for the wisdom of the Gita, it's really getting that. It's about this internal change. I will definitely say that in my life, I will genuinely make the prayer many times to know, because sometimes I will find that to differentiate, separate the mind and what's happening in the heart or what the soul is calling me to do, it can sometimes be difficult to decipher and differentiate. And so I will often pray to make that, ask divine to make that very clear. And one of the ways in my life that it's come about is that unrelated people in my life will be bringing the same message, and it'll be repeated, right? And for me, it's been such a tremendous thing when you see that people who actually don't know each other in their life and have no connection bring forward that same message. And to me, I've used that as a as a tool for me to help better understand my internal world as well. So, but thank you for that. We're just going to move on to the next. Sorry, go ahead. Was there someone?
I just said I love that. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
And just one more thing to add, maybe.
Yes, please, Livia.
So we tend to have our thought and our heart. We want to align it, but at times it's really hard if we have utopian tendencies. So, for example, in our workplace, you believe in humanity, you believe in and I'm not saying like those are not good dreams to have, but you risk being somewhat brainwashed by the system. So your heart and your mind are really difficult to differentiate between the two, because you think that is your purpose. You're serving something of a higher good. And for me, at least, the universe literally breaks me down physically to get me away from that utopia and kind of go in depth. And I really like what Avantika said about that internal change happening, even though you're at a state of inaction, physically speaking. So those are really strong signs for me as well.
Yeah, thank you. And Livia, you bring up this point of, internal signs, what we feel. And I think it's always important to reconcile what we feel with reality. And then the question is, how do we know what reality is? And I always use, the wisdom texts like the Bhagavad Gita to help, navigate that path of reality, because there's everybody else's opinion, and every opinion is worthwhile. But then there's also divine instructions that come to us. And I think it's important for everybody else's opinion to be at least compared to what the divine opinion is, because that's been around for thousands of years. That's never changed, and it's withstood the test of time. So I think, there's in the system of yoga, there's three ways by which, when we want to check something, we check with three sources. One, we check with our mentors or the sadhus. We check with the shastra or the scripture, right? And then we check with peers or those who are also practitioners on that path. So that these three, this three-pointed system of guru, sadhu, and shastra, our teachers, our mentors, and the scripture come together and should align when we're trying to move forward. And I think having that three-point system, balance system, is very effective because, again, sometimes what might be popular and all the people, what may necessarily, sometimes all the people might be bringing your life may be inconsistent with, with certain divine or scriptural teaching. So I think it's always good to have that piece, in the picture as well. So I will just
we don't have it, unfortunately, in our society, right? We don't have that triangular balance. So
yeah, you're very true. And I think, to me, this group, serves one of those purposes, right? Of peers that we can come to for, again, that like-mindedness that we were talking about in the group just earlier today, that swajati of trying to be like-minded, of understanding and of character, right? It's not just anybody that we go for that like-mindedness and understanding. It's people who are really, to me, again, determined to work through those powerful enemies, which is really what the next slide is about. And if we see here, this is just simply a list that was listed off in the book. But if we see here, these are the powerful enemies that we're facing, right? And it says here, like Arjuna, we face fierce hordes of powerful enemies. This is the beginning of section 2. Toxic, disabling forces like rage, fear, lamentation, unease, confusion, jealousy, boredom, arrogance, self-pity, greed, contempt, resentment, judgment, hate, unkindness, perpetual want, and discontent. So the way we were kind of leading into from that initial question is to kind of think about, again, these powerful emotions that we have on a day-to-day basis, and how so many times our challenges, even though we feel that there's many things coming out into our lives that might be external and pushing us, but then also how these, certain inner, you can call them inner demons or inner enemies, how they also come about and then build the story that we have to those external, challenges or those external factors that we see, right? And so it's really important that this Bhagavad Gita and the wisdom that comes in this book, they're specifically meant to deal with these powerful enemies, right? We see Arjuna, he comes in a state, right? We reviewed the things that he's going through. He's going through a panic attack. He's suffering from lamentation. He's suffering from fear. He's suffering from discontentment, confusion, right? And so many of these things are, self-pity again. So many of the things we see in him and his experience. And I'm sure we don't have to look too far to see at some point in our life, us being able to identify with one of these enemies. And I always go back to the picture that we have from Book of Dharma, but there are, the yoga texts talk about 6 enemies of the mind, specifically the enemies of the mind. And, all 6 of these were found on that list. But I always like the visual kind of interpretation of things that we, sometimes can, there's going to be always some that are more prominent than others. But I think all of these deserve some, at least reflection upon to what extent they are, and they are present in our life, and how we can go about addressing them. But really, this is what the wisdom in this text that we're talking about is really meant for these inner enemies. And so, as we've said, the mind can be the worst friend, or sorry, the best friend or the worst enemy, right? And so this many people have quoted this, but this kind of term comes from originally in 6th chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, where the whole chapter is dedicated to the mind, right? And so this saying that has been famously created really is coming from this chapter of the Bhagavad Gita originally, and Krishna specifically talks about how the mind can be our best friend or our worst enemy. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to just share a really great video on this topic from a mentor of mine. His name is Radhanath Swami, and he talks about these 2 kind of polar states.
Forgiveness, humility, kindness, responsible self-control, decency in how we do our business. I know some of the wealthiest people. They earn their money with integrity, and they spend it with compassion. And they're as competitive as anybody could be and successful as anybody can be, but they built it on this foundation of love. You see, this bad dog, envy and anger and hatred and vengeance and greed and selfishness. And then the good dog is there, which is our good character. And they're both trying to demand our attention. I think we all have that experience. And for some people, that bad dog really barks loud. And the good dog, which dog is going to control us? Which dog is going to bark the loudest within us? It's the one we choose to feed. Real culture, real humanity is to learn the art in every situation, even if it's challenging, to feed the good dog within us and neglect the bad dog. We are inherently good. We are inherently godly. To reorient ourselves to our true nature. It's the greatest need for fulfillment within our own lives, and it's the greatest need within the world. Within our tradition, we chant these mantras, or the beautiful sweet names of God. And the purpose of that is simply like a mirror. When you look in a mirror, you're supposed to see yourself, but when it's covered with dust, you see dust. When we clean the mirror of the heart through these beautiful spiritual practices, then we see the beauty of the love of our true nature. And we could reflect that love in whatever we do. I'm so grateful. Thank you so very, very much.
I really always liked the story of these competing two dogs. It comes from originally that story, as far as I know from researching that story, comes from the native culture. That the native culture talks about these two dogs that we have in our life, and I think about it as, you know, the mind, the end, kind of as the best friend or the worst enemy. And it really, you know, sometimes it can be as simple as what, you know, how we're feeding it, and really that's where we wanted to go with the next question was just being able to identify, you know, habits or daily activities that we have that feed both our good and bad dog. And if we can, you know, help maybe identify some of those things, some of the things we love that we do for ourselves, and some of the things that maybe we're not so happy about or we'd love to change, and just being able to put those on paper and see, I think can help us identify, as he was saying, to better able to choose and feed the good. All right. So I feel like collecting inventory is always a good thing at any point. Taking a moment to pause and see what habits we have that are both helpful to us and that we could maybe augment. We wanted to just go into the last part of the chapter and of this chapter, and it's specifically around the now, you know, we've talked, I feel like this book has done a really effective job of building up, but I'm sure everyone's like, okay, so what are the, you know, what is this wisdom that we keep talking about every week, the specifics? And so we're gonna now kind of talk about the four main, for everyone that saw read, does anyone want to kind of recall or remember the four main teachings for navigating the dark night? Or the first one?
losing ourselves in search of worldly worth. I think that was one of them.
Ami, can you repeat that again?
Losing ourselves in search for the world, some more worth.
Yeah, so those were, I mean, I'm thinking back to, those were, I think, the 6 ineffective design principles. But what we're talking about now is like the 4 main kind of teachings or points that Simon highlights at the end of this chapter for us to approach the dark night, right? I'll just remind everyone, the first one was setting out on the journey of the soul. So if everyone sees, this is the, if everyone's seen the Wizard of Oz, this is the famous yellow golden path that she is on, looking for the wizard. And so this this first point really, if we remember, it's about, you know, at least making the intention and, you know, making this a priority in our life, right? The journey of the soul. And what does it mean to be on the journey of the soul? We will, you know, we get into in the other principles, but for this first step, there must be knowledge, right? And the Bhagavad Gita describes that knowledge isn't what we probably, you know, interpret in day-to-day life. Knowledge is specifically defined as that which differentiates matter and spirit, right? That is the specific way that how knowledge is defined in this text of the Gita, is how to, you know, differentiate these 2 things. And so we see here, I'll just read a section. In connecting with the universal teacher and being open to the wisdom of yoga, Arjuna sets out on a journey of the soul. Instead of avoidance, denial, or escapism, he chooses to embark on a journey of consciousness. He has begun a rite of passage or initiation in which the illusory ego dies. In doing so, he has stepped across the first threshold into the temple of yoga. This is the first of 4 powerful yoga teachings in the Gita for crossing the dark night, setting out on the journey of the soul. And there's a very famous verse that I'll just read. It's 2.7 in the Bhagavad Gita, and this is kind of, you know, his journey is set out. The whole first chapter, if everyone notices, if they look at this specific text, that the whole first chapter is Arjuna talking, and Krishna just listens the entire time, where he's talking about the different reasons why he wants to fight. And then finally, he realizes that he's in such a state. And he says, I am confused about my duty and overwhelmed with fear and weakness. I surrender to you as your disciple and beg you to teach me what is best for me. And so there has to be an element of seeking higher wisdom or guidance for us to be able to get onto this, you know, to get on this journey. There has to be an element of surrender. So that is the first point that Simon makes as the tool. The second is, if everyone remembers, let every step be its own reward. And these images, I have to give credit to Palak for these images. And she, you know, I think Pac-Man is a great, everyone must remember Pac-Man when they were little. But that, you know, we're in this maze, you know, I love this analogy because we're in this maze of life, but that every, you know, one thing that we can hold, you know, every step that we can take towards getting out of that maze, see that as a reward in itself. And that every step that we take is an important one. And so to that's, you know, and it's said here in the book, Krishna teaches Arjuna the secret of action that doesn't bind us, action that doesn't lead to suffering. This action is performed for its own reward without an attachment to results. This is a powerful form of yoga called karma yoga, and is the second of 4 principal yoga teachings on the journey of the soul. Let every step be its own reward. And really, it's the point here that we're getting is trying to act it's termed the selfless action, right? So acting for action's sake, not with the desire to obtain fruit or result or be at some sort of destination. And I can say for myself, this, just trying to even bring this mindset into my day-to-day life changes so many things. To me, this one really gets at the notion of expectation that we have in our life, and the expectation of always, I guess, needing something, deriving something, getting something, achieving something on, in whatever we're doing. And Krishna will specifically, he progresses through this discussion of karma yoga, of kind of this action without being attached to the fruit or the result. But he does, eventually get to what action is a desirable action, and what our kind of mindset should be. But again, it just speaks to this second teaching of let every step be its own reward. The third is let discernment be the warrior's sword. And I really love this one, because if one goes to the last verse of the fourth chapter, it very much talks about what is the warrior's, what makes up the warrior's sword. And Krishna says at the end of the fourth chapter, therefore, Arjuna, the weapon of knowledge removes doubts in your heart. Armed with yoga, stand and fight, right? And so he's talking about how knowledge is required to be our discernment. But again, remember we said knowledge of what differentiates matter and spirit. And I was just thinking back to Avni and I, every week we walk into this discussion on remembering who we are. And it's really a discussion on how we can live more in line with our soul. And I really see that discussion every week kind of highlighting, creating that discernment of trying to differentiate what's matter, what's my ego, and what's really spirit, and what's the soul. So this is a really, really important one. And this knowledge that we gain from the wisdom teachings is going to be what helps us, create that discernment. But that is the warrior sword, and that, we've talked about before, but this concept that comes up in the Bhagavad Gita is weakness of heart, right? This weakness of heart is really what holds us back so many times in our life, because again, they're impacted by those powerful enemies. But that we need, again, with the weapon of knowledge, right? It's not supposed to be like a light thing. This is, we're using knowledge as our weapon to slash this weakness of heart, or these ropes that that create doubts within us. And then the fourth is let sacred love be your only goal. And I mean, this one pretty much speaks for itself, but I'll just reference one part of the book. It says, so much of our personal story has been inherited and hasn't been authorized with awareness or conscious intent. The disintegration of that story in times of crisis and despair creates an opportunity to rewrite our story with love and affection as its foundations. It's an opportunity to make sacred love the guiding principle in our life. This is then the ultimate spiritual lesson on the journey of the soul. Let sacred love be your only goal. This is the inner sanctum, the confidential heart of the temple of yoga. Krishna explains to Arjuna that sacred love is the most secret teaching of all, as well as the most easily performed. When our purpose is an expression of sacred love, there is nothing more nourishing or fulfilling in all the world. This is because sacred love is the nature of the soul. Although set on the battlefield at the onset of war, the Bhagavad Gita is really a guidebook on love. So the rest of this book now then will peel into these four main teachings as kind of the, bringing out some of the more salient points and how we can make them more applicable. Does anyone have any closing thoughts or comments? And I think, as a kind of reflection teaching taking away is this fourth point on sacred love, how we can, what small steps we can make to bring that into our day-to-day life. Does anyone have any thoughts or closing comments before we
Yes.
end? Yeah, please, Gladys.
Yes, like self-love, so important. It's actually, yeah, to first see what we want to see outside, it's to work on it inside. So first to work it with ourselves. So the more we're going to be able to develop this empathy toward ourselves, and if facing a difficulty to speak to ourselves like we would do with a great friend, I believe that the more we're going to be able to share this empathy as well with others. So first spreading the love with ourselves, having a smile, like if we go practical in the morning, looking at this mirror and look with a smile and yes, I love you. And saying, looking into our eyes and I love you, saying our first name and I love you, abilities, and wishing you a great day. And like behind me, actually, you can see a picture of myself, like being 4 years old, and just, yes, looking at this one to see, yes, you're going to rock the day. You can see as well, just behind, I've written a few sentences on how I see myself and how I see my character developing. But it starts first with having the intention to first recognize our potential and the love we have within ourselves, to be able then to carry that with us when we meet with the world, and show them as well how brilliant they are. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bilitis. And that picture of your 4-year-old self, I think all of us should have a picture like that up to remind us of that child mindset that is, one of fearlessness, right? We can all see that in children, and yeah, trying to, it's not an easy thing, but so many times we want to live with our heart, but it's not always, sometimes it's been taken advantage of or mistreated. But coming back to that space, that really is the journey of the soul. So anyone else have any closing comments? I really thank everyone for joining today. I thought, it was such wonderful realizations and intentions that were shared. Thank you so much, everybody.